I was watering my roses in the backyard when my phone rang. It was Brooke. "Listen, Helen, you do nothing all day anyway. Watch my kids for 2 weeks while I travel. Don't make this difficult." And she hung up before I could respond. 27 years I'd spent raising Michael alone, working double shifts to give him everything. Now his wife dismissed me in 20 seconds. I set down my watering can and took a deep breath. Then I walked inside and sat at my kitchen table. But there was something Brooke didn't know about me. Something I'd learned during all those years as a teacher, dealing with difficult parents and protecting children. I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Lauren's number, my friend who worked in social services. At that very moment, I realized this wasn't just about babysitting. This was about something much bigger. I smiled as I started dialing. "My name is Helen Miller, and I was about to teach my daughter-in-law a lesson she'd never forget." Lauren answered on the second ring. I could hear the familiar sound of papers shuffling in her office at Child Protective Services. We'd worked together for 15 years when I was teaching at Roosevelt Elementary, handling difficult family situations that required both educational and social intervention. "Helen? What's going on?" Her voice carried that professional concern I remembered so well. I explained Brooke's demand, her dismissive tone, the way she'd hung up without waiting for my response. As I spoke, I found myself walking to my kitchen window, looking out at the small garden where I'd spent countless mornings before school, preparing lessons and grading papers while Michael ate his cereal. "This sounds like a pattern, Helen. Tell me, how long has she been treating you this way?" That question opened something I'd been keeping locked away for 3 years. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same wooden table where Michael had done his homework every night, where I'd helped him with math problems and spelling tests, where I'd signed his report cards with pride. It started small. I began, running my fingers along a small scratch in the wood that Michael had made with his toy car when he was 7. Right after they got married, actually. Brooke would make little comments about my cooking, saying it was too old-fashioned for the children. Then she started changing plans at the last minute when I was supposed to visit the grandchildren. I remembered the first Christmas after their wedding. I'd spent weeks knitting sweaters for 8-year-old Emma, 6-year-old Jake, and 4-year-old Sophie. Each one had taken me nearly 40 hours, working by lamplight after my teaching duties were done. I'd chosen their favorite colors carefully. Emma loved purple, Jake was obsessed with dinosaurs, and Sophie adored anything with flowers. When I arrived at their house that Christmas morning, my arms full of wrapped presents and a homemade apple pie, Brooke met me at the door with a tight smile. "Oh, Helen, you shouldn't have," she said, but her tone suggested she genuinely wished I hadn't. "The children have so many gifts already. We're trying to teach them about minimalism this year." I watched as Emma opened my gift, her eyes lighting up when she saw the purple sweater with the butterfly pattern I'd incorporated into the sleeves. But before she could try it on, Brooke quickly gathered all 3 sweaters. "We'll put these away for later," she announced, "after the holidays when things settled down." I never saw those sweaters again. 6 months later, when I asked Emma about the purple butterfly sweater, she looked confused and said she'd never received anything like that from me. "Lauren," I continued into the phone, "I spent $47 on the yarn for those sweaters. That was my grocery money for a week back then, right after I retired and my income dropped. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the time, the love I put into every stitch." Lauren was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Have there been other incidents like this?" The memories came flooding back. There was Michael's birthday last year, when I'd offered to host the party at my house like I'd done for his birthdays since he was a child. Brooke had laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Helen, your house is too small and old-fashioned. The children need something more modern, more fun." Instead, They'd rented a pavilion at an expensive entertainment center 40 minutes away. When I struggled to find parking and arrived 15 minutes late, Brooke made a point of announcing to everyone, "Well, look who finally decided to show up. We were wondering if you'd gotten lost." Then there was the incident with the photo albums. I'd spent months organizing 50 years of family photos, creating beautiful albums that traced Michael's life from infancy through college, his wedding, the birth of his children. I wanted the grandchildren to understand their family history, to see how much they were loved and where they came from. When I brought them over to show the children, Brooke flipped through them with obvious boredom. "These are so dated, Helen. Everything's digital now. Nobody looks at physical photos anymore." She handed the albums back to me, without letting the children see them properly. Emma had started looking interested in a picture of her father as a little boy, but Brooke quickly distracted her with her tablet. The pattern became clearer over time, I explained to Lauren. Every tradition I tried to share, every memory I wanted to create with the grandchildren, Brooke found a way to dismiss or redirect. Last month, I offered to teach Emma how to bake my grandmother's chocolate chip cookies, the same recipe I'd used to teach Michael when he was her age. Brooke said Emma was too busy with soccer practice and screen time was limited to educational content only. But the most painful memory was from just 2 weeks ago. I'd been gardening, thinking about the upcoming summer and how I might finally be able to take that trip to Ireland I'd been dreaming about for 15 years. My retirement savings, carefully built from decades of summer school teaching and weekend tutoring, finally allowed me some freedom. Michael had called me that evening, his voice flat and tired. "Mom, Brooke thinks it would be better if you didn't come to Sophie's birthday party this weekend." My heart stopped. "Why? What did I do wrong?" "She says you always try to take over, and Sophie gets confused about who's in charge. She wants to keep things simple this year." I'd raised Michael to be polite, respectful, to avoid confrontation. But somewhere along the way, those qualities had transformed into passivity. He no longer stood up for himself or for me. He'd become a stranger, someone who delivered his wife's cruelties with his father's kind voice. "Michael," I'd said carefully, "I gave you your first birthday party when you were 3, after your father died. I spent my last $20 on that Mickey Mouse cake from the grocery store bakery. I've never missed one of your birthdays, and I've never missed one of your children's birthdays. Are you really going to let her change that now?" There was a long silence. Then he said, "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." That was the moment I realized I'd lost my son. Not to death, not to distance, but to someone who saw me as an obstacle rather than family. "Lauren, I need to tell you something else," I said, pulling myself back to the present phone conversation. "Yesterday, before Brooke called about watching the children, I received my credit card statement. There were charges I didn't make. Small ones, but clearly from places I've never been. When I called the bank, they said the charges came from a card with my name but a different address. I could hear Lauren's pen clicking, a sound I remembered from our meetings about troubled students. "Helen, that sounds like identity fraud. Have you confronted anyone in your family about this?" "I haven't told anyone yet. But the address on the fraudulent card is Michael and Brooke's address, and 3 of the charges were for children's clothing stores." The silence stretched between us. Finally, Lauren spoke, her voice now carrying a different tone, one I recognized from her most serious cases. "Helen, I think we need to meet in person. Can you come to my office this afternoon and bring everything you have, bank statements, phone records, anything that documents these incidents? What you're describing isn't just rudeness or family tension. This sounds like a systematic pattern of emotional abuse and financial exploitation." I looked around my kitchen, at the home where I'd raised my son with love and structure, where I'd planned to spend my golden years in peace. Sunlight streamed through the window above the sink, the same window where I'd watched Michael play in the backyard, where I'd worried about him during his difficult teenage years, where I'd celebrated when he graduated college and got his first job. "I'll be there at 3 o'clock," I told Lauren. After I hung up, I sat at that familiar table and made a list. Not a grocery list or a lesson plan like I'd made thousands of times before, but an inventory of everything I could remember that felt wrong, everything I'd dismissed as small slights or misunderstandings. The list filled 3 pages. At the top of the first page, I wrote the date and time of Brooke's call. June 15th, 10:47 a.m. Demanded I babysit for 2 weeks, said I'd do nothing anyway, hung up without discussion. Below that, I documented every incident I could remember, with dates and witnesses when possible. The discarded sweaters, the missed birthday party, the interrupted baking lesson, the dismissed photo albums, the changed holiday plans, the constant subtle criticisms about my house, my cooking, my old-fashioned ways. By the time I finished writing, I understood something that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. I was being systematically erased from my own family. But I also understood something else, something that came from 35 years of teaching children who came from difficult homes. Patterns like this don't happen accidentally. They're planned, they're purposeful, and they usually escalate. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Carol's number. Carol had been my teaching partner for 20 years before she retired to become a private investigator specializing in family cases. If anyone would know how to document and respond to what was happening, it would be her. "Carol, it's Helen. I need your help with something, and it's not a social call." I spent the next hour laying out everything I'd told Lauren, plus the financial irregularities I'd discovered. Carol listened without interrupting, asking only for clarifications about dates and specific amounts. "Helen, you're going to laugh at this, but do you still have that little digital recorder you used for taking notes during parent conferences?" I did laugh, despite everything. "It's in my desk drawer." "Why?" "Because starting today, you're going to carry it everywhere." Every conversation, every phone call, every interaction with Brooke or anyone in this situation gets recorded. Texas is a one-party consent state, which means as long as you're part of the conversation, you can record it legally. "Carol, I don't want to be sneaky or underhanded." "Helen, listen to me carefully. What you've described isn't a family disagreement. It's emotional abuse, financial fraud, and parental alienation. The children are being taught to disrespect and dismiss you, which is harmful to them as well as to you. You're not being sneaky. You're gathering evidence to protect yourself and your grandchildren." That afternoon, I drove to Lauren's office with a folder full of documents and a small recorder in my purse. The Child Protective Services building looked the same as it had during my teaching years, but I was entering it for the first time as a victim rather than as a concerned educator. Lauren's office was exactly as I remembered, organized chaos, with case files stacked on every surface, but somehow she could find anything she needed within seconds. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, the same chair where I'd sat dozens of times discussing students whose home situations required intervention. "Show me everything," she said. I spread out my bank statements, phone records, and the 3-page list I'd written that morning. Lauren examined each document carefully, making notes and asking specific questions about dates and amounts. "Helen, the financial issues alone are enough to involve law enforcement. But combined with the emotional manipulation and the children's welfare, this becomes a more complex case. I need to ask you directly. When Brooke drops off these children for 2 weeks, what do you think her real plan is?" I'd been avoiding that question since the morning phone call, but Lauren's direct approach forced me to confront it. "I think she's testing whether I'll comply with unreasonable demands. And I think she's establishing a pattern where she can claim I'm the children's primary caregiver if it benefits her somehow. Lauren nodded grimly. That's exactly what I think too. In custody cases, we often see manipulative parents use grandparents as free childcare while simultaneously undermining their relationship with the children. It serves two purposes. It provides convenience for the parent, and it creates confusion about family roles that can be exploited later. She pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to take those children for the 2 weeks as requested, but you're going to document everything: their behavior, their comments about family members, their physical and emotional state when they arrive, and throughout their stay. What if they're hostile or difficult? They barely know me anymore. Then you handle it the same way you handled difficult students for 35 years, with patience, structure, and clear boundaries. And you document how they respond to consistent care and attention. Lauren handed me several forms. These are incident report templates. Every day you'll fill out what happened, what was said, how the children reacted. If they make comments about their parents, their home life, or their understanding of family relationships, you write it down immediately. This feels like I'm spying on my own grandchildren. No, Helen. You're protecting them. Children who are caught in manipulative situations often don't understand what's happening to them. Sometimes the only way to help them is to document the truth of their experience so that adults can make better decisions about their welfare. Over the next 2 hours, Lauren and I developed what she called a comprehensive response plan. It had 4 main components: legal documentation, financial protection, logistical preparation, and social support. The legal documentation included not just the daily incident reports, but also a request to Michael's bank for records showing any unusual activity on accounts where I was listed as an emergency contact or beneficiary. Lauren explained that financial abuse often involved accessing accounts belonging to elderly family members, especially when those family members had trusted the abuser with personal information. Your son has access to some of your financial information, doesn't he? Lauren asked. Yes, he's on my emergency contact list for my checking account and savings account. When I had my knee surgery 2 years ago, I gave him temporary access so he could pay my bills if needed. And he never removed that access? I realized with growing alarm that I'd never thought to check. I don't know. Tomorrow morning, you're going to the bank. You're going to review every account, change every password, and remove any access you didn't specifically authorize recently. If there have been unauthorized transactions, the bank will have records. The financial protection plan also included setting up a separate account that only I could access, transferring my retirement funds to a new financial advisor who had no connection to Michael or Brooke, and placing security freezes on my credit reports to prevent any new accounts from being opened in my name. The logistical preparation focused on creating a safe, structured environment for the children during their 2-week stay. Lauren recommended removing or securing anything that could be used to manipulate the children or to create false narratives about their care. Install a security camera system, she suggested. Nothing hidden or secretive, just visible cameras in common areas that will record interactions. If the children make accusations, or if Brooke claims something happened that didn't happen, you'll have evidence. That seems extreme. Helen, you're dealing with someone who's already shown she'll lie and manipulate. Protection isn't extreme, it's necessary. The social support component was the most important, Lauren explained. I needed to create a network of witnesses and allies who could observe the situation independently and provide testimony if needed. Call your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Ask her to check on you and the children regularly during those 2 weeks. Invite your church friends over for dinner. Take the children to community activities where other adults can interact with them and observe their behavior. What am I hoping to accomplish with all this? Lauren leaned back in her chair, her expression serious but not unkind. Helen, the best-case scenario is that Brooke's behavior changes when she realizes she can't manipulate you anymore, and your family relationships improve. The worst-case scenario is that her behavior escalates, and you need evidence to protect yourself and those children through legal intervention. And the most likely scenario? The most likely scenario is that she's going to test your boundaries, try to make you look incompetent or unreasonable, and then use your reactions to justify further limiting your access to the grandchildren. Unless you're prepared to respond strategically, she's going to win. I drove home that evening with a folder full of forms, a list of tasks that would take me the entire next week to complete, and a small recorder that Carol had upgraded to a more sophisticated digital device. But I also drove home with something I hadn't felt in 3 years, a sense of purpose and direction. That night, I called Michael. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Hi, Mom. What's up? I wanted to let you know that I'll be happy to take care of Emma, Jake, and Sophie for the 2 weeks while Brooke travels." There was surprise in his voice. "Oh, great. Brooke will be pleased." "I'm sure she will." "When should I expect them?" "This Sunday evening, I think. Brooke's flight is early Monday morning." "And when will she return?" 2 weeks from then. So, the following Sunday. I made notes as we talked, already implementing Lauren's documentation system. "Michael, can you give me Brooke's flight information and contact details for where she'll be staying, in case of emergency with the children?" I'm not sure she's finalized all that yet." That was the first lie I caught him in, though certainly not the first lie he'd told. Adults don't make 2-week trips without finalized arrangements, especially when leaving their children. "That's fine. Just have her text me the information before she leaves." After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table again and began planning. Not the way I'd planned lessons for 35 years, focusing on education and growth, but the way I'd planned interventions for the most difficult cases, focusing on protection and evidence. The next morning, I went to the bank. What I discovered there changed everything. Since my knee surgery 2 years ago, there had been 17 unauthorized transactions on my accounts. None of them were large enough to trigger automatic alerts, but together, they totaled $3,847. The transactions included charges for children's clothing, electronics, gasoline, and what appeared to be payments to a legal office in Miami. "Mrs. Miller," the bank manager explained, "these all came from a card that was issued on your account, but sent to a different address. The card was requested online using your Social Security number and account information." "What address?" She showed me the screen. Michael and Brooke's address. "I never requested this card, and I never authorized anyone to request it." "In that case, we're looking at identity theft and credit fraud. I'll need to involve our security department and provide you with affidavits for the police report." I spent 3 hours at the bank, signing forms and providing statements. By the time I left, I had documentation proving that someone with access to my personal information had been systematically stealing from me for 2 years. The timeline was unmistakable. The unauthorized transactions began 1 month after Brooke started limiting my visits with the grandchildren. That afternoon, I met Carol for lunch at a restaurant near her office. I brought copies of all the bank documentation and the incident report forms Lauren had given me. Carol reviewed everything while eating her salad, occasionally making small sounds of recognition that I remembered from our teaching days when we'd encountered a familiar pattern of problematic behavior. "Helen, this is bigger than family drama. This is organized fraud with a long-term plan. Look at these charges: children's clothing in sizes that match your grandchildren, electronics that could be resold, legal consultation fees. Someone was building resources while preparing for something." "Preparing for what?" "I don't know yet. But those legal fees were paid to a firm in Miami. That's not local divorce representation. That's either immigration law or some kind of relocation planning. Carol pulled out her laptop and spent several minutes searching online databases. Here, she said, turning the screen toward me. Martinez and Associates, Family Law and Immigration Services, Miami, Florida. They specialize in custody disputes involving relocation and international adoption. The implications hit me like cold water. You think Brooke is planning to take the children somewhere? I think Brooke is planning something that requires legal representation in another state, and she's been funding it with your money. That evening, I installed the security camera system that Lauren had recommended. It took me 4 hours and 3 calls to my neighbor's teenager for help with the technical setup. But by bedtime, I had cameras in the kitchen, living room, and backyard areas where the children would spend most of their time. I also set up what Carol called environmental documentation, labeled containers for the children's belongings when they arrived, a daily schedule template that would record their activities and meals, and a communication log for any phone calls or messages from their parents. You're not trying to be sneaky, Carol had reminded me. You're being thorough. If someone questions your care of these children, you want to be able to prove exactly what happened every single day. On Saturday, I did something I hadn't done in 40 years. I went shopping for children's clothes, toys, and activities without knowing whether the children would appreciate them or whether their parents would allow them to keep what I bought. But this time was different. Instead of choosing items based on what I hoped would make the children happy, I chose items that would support the structured educational environment I planned to create. Art supplies for daily creative time, educational games that didn't require screens, books appropriate for each child's reading level, ingredients for simple cooking projects that would teach them practical skills. I spent $347 of my own money that hadn't been stolen from my accounts, money that I documented carefully with receipts and photographs. That evening, Michael called. "Mom, I just wanted to thank you again for taking the kids. This trip is really important for Brooke's career." "What kind of conference is she attending?" There was a pause. It's related to her marketing work." Another lie. Brooke had never worked in marketing. For the 3 years I'd known her, she'd described herself as a freelance social media consultant, which, as far as I could tell, meant she managed Instagram accounts for local businesses when she felt like it. "That sounds interesting. What company is sponsoring the conference?" I'd have to ask her for the details. "Michael, I'd like to have complete contact information for Brooke while she's away. Phone numbers, hotel information, conference schedule. If something happens with the children, I need to be able to reach her immediately." "Of course, Mom." That makes sense. But when Sunday evening arrived and Brooke dropped off the children, the contact information she provided was a single cell phone number and a vague mention of probably staying near the convention center. The children came to my door with oversized suitcases and expressions I'd never seen on their faces before. Not excitement about visiting their grandmother, not sadness about leaving their parents, but something that looked like resignation. 8-year-old Emma carried herself like a much older child, her shoulders straight and her face serious. 6-year-old Jake clutched a tablet and avoided eye contact. 4-year-old Sophie held a stuffed animal I'd never seen before and stayed close to Emma's side. "Mama Helen," Brooke announced with false enthusiasm, using a name the children had never called me. "Look who's excited to spend time with their grandmother." None of the children looked excited. "Now remember what we talked about," Brooke continued, speaking to the children but looking at me. "Grandma Helen has different rules than we do at home. You'll need to be extra patient with her because she doesn't understand modern parenting." Emma nodded solemnly. Jake continued staring at his tablet. Sophie whispered something to her stuffed animal. "Brooke, could we have a quick word in private?" I asked, gesturing toward my kitchen. "Oh, there's no time." My flight is very early tomorrow morning, and I still have packing to finish. She knelt down and hugged each child briefly. Be good for Grandma Helen. Remember, she's old and gets tired easily, so don't expect her to keep up with you. If you need anything important, text Daddy. Then she was gone, leaving me with 3 children who looked like they were preparing for an ordeal rather than a visit with family. Well, I said, closing the door and turning to face my grandchildren. How about we start with some dinner? Emma shook her head. We ate before we came. Mama said you probably wouldn't have food we like. What kind of food do you like? Jake looked up from his tablet for the first time. Pizza and chicken nuggets and mac and cheese from the box. Those are certainly good foods. What else do you like? The children exchanged glances. Sophie whispered to Emma, who whispered back. Finally, Emma spoke for all of them. We don't know what else we like. Mama does all the food shopping. Over the next 2 hours, I learned more about my grandchildren's daily lives than I had in the previous 3 years. Not because they volunteered information, but because their behavior revealed so much about their normal routines. They expected to eat dinner while staring at screens. They had no idea how to start a conversation with an adult. They knew extensive details about cartoon characters and video games, but couldn't tell me their favorite colors or what they wanted to be when they grew up. When I suggested we put the devices away during dinner and talk about their day, Emma responded with what was clearly a practiced phrase. Mama says. Screen time limits are old-fashioned and unrealistic in the modern world. When I asked Jake what he'd learned in school recently, he looked confused and said, Mama says school is just busy work, and the real learning happens online. When I asked Sophie if she wanted to help me set the table, she backed away and said, Mama says I'm too little to help with grown-up things, and I might break something important. Every response contained a message from their mother, and every message was designed to undermine my authority or dismiss my values. But I also noticed things that gave me hope. When I put gentle music on, instead of letting them use their devices during dinner, Sophie started swaying to the rhythm. When I asked Emma to help me find plates in my cabinet, she seemed pleased to be trusted with the task. When I showed Jake how to fold his napkin properly, he practiced the technique several times with obvious concentration. They were good children. They'd just been taught to expect very little from adults and to rely primarily on entertainment rather than interaction. That first night, as I helped them get settled in the bedrooms I'd prepared, I began implementing Lauren's documentation system. After each interaction, I quietly recorded my observations using the digital device Carol had given me. Day 1, 8:30 p.m. Children arrived with multiple electronic devices and very few personal items. Emotional presentation appeared resigned, rather than excited. Emma demonstrates caretaking behavior toward younger siblings. Jake shows signs of screen dependency. Sophie displays delayed social development, but responds positively to structure. All 3 children repeat phrases that seem coached, all designed to position my parenting approach as outdated or harmful. 9:15 p.m. Bedtime routine reveals children have no established sleep schedule. Emma requests to stay awake to monitor Jake and Sophie, saying, Mama lets me stay up to take care of them if they have bad dreams. Jake wants to sleep with his tablet, claiming, the sounds help me fall asleep. Sophie asks if I'm going to check on them too much, because Mama says grandmas sometimes don't understand boundaries. 9:45 p.m. After establishing gentle but firm boundaries around bedtime, all 3 children complied without significant resistance. Emma asked if she was in trouble for going to bed at the time I suggested. Jake asked if I was mad that he had to turn off his tablet. Sophie asked if I still loved her even though she couldn't stay up late. These responses suggest they expect negative consequences for normal childhood boundaries. Over the next 3 days, I documented a pattern that broke my heart. These children had been taught to expect very little emotional connection from adults, to anticipate criticism for normal childhood needs, and to believe that love was conditional on perfect compliance with often unreasonable expectations. But I also documented their remarkable capacity for growth when provided with consistent structure and genuine attention. By Thursday, Emma was helping me plan meals and asking questions about my teaching career. Jake had voluntarily put away his tablet during several activities, discovering that he enjoyed building puzzles and reading adventure stories. Sophie had started following me around the house, chattering about everything she noticed and asking to help with simple tasks. The transformation wasn't complete, and it wasn't without challenges. There were moments when each child tested my boundaries, repeated dismissive phrases about my old-fashioned ways, or expressed confusion about why I expected them to participate in family activities rather than entertaining themselves independently. But there were also moments of genuine connection that reminded me why I'd become a teacher and why I'd fought so hard to remain part of their lives. On Friday morning, something happened that changed the entire trajectory of our time together. Jake couldn't find his favorite tablet game and became upset, not with normal childhood frustration, but with a level of panic that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "I have to find it," he kept repeating. "Mama will be so mad if I lose it. She'll say I can't handle responsibility." Emma immediately began helping him search, her face tight with worry. "Jake, remember what Mama said about bothering Grandma Helen with our problems? We have to figure this out ourselves." Sophie started crying, not because she couldn't find the game, but because her siblings were distressed. I sat down on the floor next to them and spoke quietly. "Jake, let's talk about this. What happens at home when you lose something or break something accidentally?" The story that emerged over the next hour revealed a household where normal childhood mistakes were treated as major failures, where the children were expected to manage adult-level responsibilities for their own care and entertainment, and where love and approval were explicitly tied to perfect performance. "Mama says if we can't take care of our things, it means we don't appreciate what we have," Emma explained. "And if we don't appreciate what we have, maybe we don't deserve it." "When I spilled juice on the carpet last month, Mama said I had to pay for professional cleaning out of my birthday money," Jake added. "She said natural consequences teach better lessons than forgiveness." "Mama told Sophie she couldn't go to the park with us because she forgot to put away her toys perfectly," Emma continued. "She said Sophie needed to learn that family activities are earned, not given." I documented every detail of that conversation, but more importantly, I began to understand the scope of what these children had been experiencing. That afternoon, I called Lauren from my bedroom while the children were occupied with an art project. "Lauren, I need to report suspected emotional abuse. The children are displaying behaviors consistent with psychological manipulation and parentification. Tell me specifically what you've observed." I read from my notes, describing the children's responses to normal boundaries, their excessive worry about disappointing adults, their assumption that love was conditional on perfect behavior. "Helen, what you're describing meets the criteria for emotional neglect and psychological abuse. The children are being taught to take responsibility for adult emotions and to suppress their own needs to avoid conflict. This is harmful to their development and creates long-term trauma. What should I do? Continue documenting everything, but also continue providing them with the structure and unconditional support they need. Sometimes the best evidence of abuse is seeing how children respond when they're in a healthy environment." That evening, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week earlier. I called Michael. "Michael, I need to talk to you about the children's behavior and some concerns I have about their emotional well-being." "Mom, is everything okay? Are they being difficult?" "No, they're not being difficult. They're being perfect, and that's the problem. I explained what I'd observed: the excessive compliance, the worry about adult approval, the assumption that mistakes would result in withdrawn love. Michael, these are not normal behaviors for children their ages. They suggest the children are living in an environment where they feel emotionally unsafe. Mom, I think you're overanalyzing. Kids adapt to different households. They're probably just trying to be polite. Jake is 6 years old, and he apologized to me for needing help tying his shoes because he didn't want to bother me with things he should know how to do. Sophie is 4 years old, and she asked me if I would still like her if she accidentally spilled something. These aren't adaptations, Michael. These are signs of emotional trauma. There was a long pause. What are you saying, Mom? I'm saying these children need counseling, and they need adults who will provide unconditional love and support while they heal from whatever they've been experiencing. Are you accusing Brooke of abusing my children? The question hung between us like a challenge. I could back down, apologize for overreacting, pretend I hadn't seen what I'd clearly observed, or I could tell the truth and risk losing access to these children forever. I'm saying these children are showing signs of emotional distress, and someone needs to pay attention to that. Michael's voice changed, becoming cold and defensive. I think you've been alone too much, Mom. I think you're seeing problems where there aren't any because you want to feel needed. That accusation hit me like a physical blow, not because it was cruel, but because it revealed how thoroughly Brooke had succeeded in manipulating Michael's perception of me. Michael, I documented everything I've observed. I have recordings of conversations, notes about behaviors, photographs of their responses to different situations. This isn't about me feeling needed. This is about children who need help. You've been recording my children? I've been documenting concerning behaviors that suggest emotional abuse. Mom, I think this arrangement isn't working. I'm going to call Brooke and ask her to come home early. Michael, before you do that, I want you to spend some time here. I want you to observe your children's behavior yourself. Come for dinner tomorrow night. Watch how they interact with adults. Listen to the things they say about emotions and mistakes and family relationships. Fine, I'll come tomorrow. But if I think you're overstepping boundaries or creating problems, I'm taking them home immediately. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since this situation began. Not from frustration or fear, but from grief for the family I'd thought I was protecting and the son I wasn't sure I recognized anymore. But then I looked at my documentation from the past week, pages of notes describing 3 children who were learning to trust that adults could provide consistency without conditions, that mistakes were normal parts of learning, that love didn't have to be earned through perfect behavior. Whatever happened next, I'd given them a week of experiencing what childhood could feel like when adults took responsibility for creating safety rather than demanding performance. Saturday morning, Emma asked me a question that crystallized everything I'd been trying to understand. Grandma Helen, when Mama comes back, will you tell her we were good? Emma, you are good. You don't have to earn that or prove that. You're good because you're you. She looked at me with confusion. But if we're not good enough, will Mama take us away and not let us see you anymore? The question revealed the level of insecurity these children lived with daily, but it also revealed something else. They'd grown attached to the experience of being in my home, and they were afraid of losing it. Emma, no matter what happens, I will always love you and Jake and Sophie. That will never change based on anything you do or don't do. She nodded, but I could see she didn't entirely believe me. In her experience, adult love was always conditional and always fragile. That afternoon, Michael arrived for dinner. I watched him interact with his children and saw immediately that he'd been as manipulated as they had been. When Jake spilled a small amount of water while helping set the table, Michael's first response was to look around anxiously and say, "Jake, be more careful. You know how important it is to take care of other people's things." Jake's shoulders immediately tensed, and he began apologizing repeatedly. I gently intervened. "Jake, accidents happen. Let's just clean it up together." But Michael continued, "Mom, I'm sorry about that. He's usually more careful." "Michael, he's 6 years old. 6-year-olds spill things. It's not a character flaw." During dinner, I observed Michael unconsciously reinforcing the same patterns I'd been working to change. When Sophie laughed loudly at something Jake said, Michael immediately hushed her with, "Sophie, use your inside voice. We don't want to bother Grandma Helen." When Emma tried to tell him about the art project she'd been working on, he responded with, "That's nice, sweetheart, but let's focus on eating dinner properly." After the children went to play in the backyard, I confronted Michael directly. "Michael, do you see how you interact with your children? Every natural childhood behavior is treated as a problem to be corrected. I'm teaching them manners and consideration for others. You're teaching them that their personalities and expressions are burdens to the adults around them." I showed him my documentation from the week, not the recordings or formal reports I'd prepared for Lauren, but the simple observations about his children's growth and happiness. "Look at this," I said, pointing to notes from Wednesday. "Emma helped me cook dinner and told me about a book she's reading. Jake built a puzzle and told me about his favorite dinosaurs. Sophie sang me a song she made up and asked me to teach her how to braid friendship bracelets. When did you last see them express themselves this freely at home?" Michael read through my notes with growing silence. Finally, he looked up with confusion and something that might have been recognition. "They seem different here," he admitted. "More, I don't know, more like kids. They seem different because they're safe. They're not worried about disappointing anyone or performing perfectly. They're just being children." But Brooke says structure and high expectations help children develop self-discipline and respect. "Michael, there's a difference between healthy structure and emotional control. Healthy structure provides safety within which children can grow and learn. Emotional control teaches children that their worth depends on meeting impossible standards." I could see him struggling with concepts that challenged everything he'd been told about parenting and family relationships. "Mom, if what you're saying is true, then you've been manipulated, just like the children have been. The difference is that you're an adult who can choose to recognize it and change it." That evening, after Michael left, he called me from his car. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. And I've been thinking about some things at home that I haven't wanted to acknowledge. Tell me." Brooke monitors everything: my phone calls, my text messages, my time with the children. She says it's because she cares about family communication, but it doesn't feel like caring. It feels like control. What else? She makes all the decisions about the children's activities, their friendships, their school involvement. If I try to suggest something different, she says I don't understand modern parenting or child development. "Michael, how do you feel when you're at home?" There was a long pause. "Tired. Like I'm always walking on eggshells, trying not to upset anyone or make mistakes." "That's not how family should feel." "No, it's not." Sunday morning, Brooke was scheduled to return. I'd spent 2 weeks documenting systematic emotional abuse, discovering financial fraud, and watching 3 children begin to heal from psychological manipulation. But I'd also spent 2 weeks realizing that my son was as much a victim as his children were, and that saving this family would require more than just protecting myself. At 10 a.m., my phone rang. Brooke's number. "Helen, change of plans. My conference has been extended, and there are some incredible networking opportunities I can't pass up. I'm going to need you to keep the children for another week. Brooke, we agreed on 2 weeks. I made plans based on that timeline. Well, you'll have to change your plans. This is important for my career and for our family's financial future. What conference are you attending? It's very technical. You wouldn't understand the details. Try me. I taught high school for 35 years. I'm capable of understanding technical information. There was a pause, then, Helen, I don't have time for your questions. Just watch the children for another week. Michael supports this decision. Let me speak to Michael. He's not available right now. Then I'll call him directly. Helen, you're being unreasonable. These children are lucky to have a grandmother who can provide free childcare. Not everyone has that luxury. The conversation revealed everything I needed to know about Brooke's real plan. This had never been about a conference or career opportunity. This was about establishing my role as unpaid childcare provider while she pursued whatever agenda she'd been planning with stolen money and a Miami law firm. Brooke, I need your flight information and hotel contact details. If I'm responsible for the children for an additional week, I need to be able to reach you in case of emergency. I'll text you my phone number. That's sufficient contact information. It's not sufficient. I need official contact information that I can provide to schools, doctors, or emergency services if needed. Helen, you're making this unnecessarily complicated. I'm being responsible. If you can't provide appropriate contact information, then you can't extend the arrangement. The line went quiet for nearly 30 seconds. Then, I'll have Michael bring you the information this afternoon. But Michael never came that afternoon. When I called him, his phone went directly to voicemail. At 6 p.m., I called Lauren. Lauren, I think we have an escalation situation. Brooke has extended the children's stay without providing contact information, and Michael appears to be unavailable. Helen, I think it's time to implement the formal protection plan we discussed. Can you bring the children to my office tomorrow morning? I want to interview them individually about their home environment and their experiences during their stay with you. What happens if the interviews reveal what we suspect? Then we'll have grounds to petition for emergency custody protection while we investigate further. That evening, I sat with Emma, Jake, and Sophie in my living room and told them that we might need to talk to some other adults about their family situation. Emma immediately became anxious. Are we in trouble? Did we do something wrong? No, sweetheart. You haven't done anything wrong. But sometimes adults need help making sure children are safe and happy, and other adults can help figure out the best ways to do that. Jake looked up from his book. Will we get to stay with you? The question broke my heart because it revealed how much these children had grown to trust their current environment, but it also gave me hope because it showed they understood the difference between feeling safe and feeling controlled. I don't know what will happen, Jake. But I promise that whatever happens, we'll make sure you and Emma and Sophie are taken care of. Sophie curled up next to me on the couch. Grandma Helen, I like it here. I like how you're not mad when I spill things. I'm not mad when you spill things because spilling things is normal. Everyone spills things sometimes. Mama says spilling things means you're not paying attention and you don't care about being careful. What do you think about that? Sophie considered the question seriously. I think sometimes I spill things because I'm little, and my hands are little. That's exactly right. Monday morning, Lauren interviewed each child separately while I waited in the reception area. The interviews lasted 3 hours total, and when they were finished, Lauren's expression was grim. Helen, based on these interviews, I'm filing an emergency petition for temporary custody protection. The children have disclosed emotional abuse, inconsistent caregiving, and what appears to be parentification of the older child. What did they tell you? Emma believes she's responsible for her siblings' emotional and physical care because her mother is too busy with important work. Jake believes he's bad when he needs help with age-appropriate tasks. Sophie believes she has to be perfect and quiet to deserve adult attention. Lauren pulled out the formal paperwork. I'm also recommending a full investigation into the family's financial situation and Brooke's current whereabouts. The children's accounts of their mother's recent behavior don't match her claims about attending a professional conference. What happens next? You'll continue caring for the children under emergency custody authorization. Michael will be notified that there's an ongoing investigation and will be invited to participate in family counseling. And we'll attempt to locate Brooke for questioning about her abandonment of the children and the financial irregularities you've documented. That afternoon, two things happened that confirmed our worst suspicions. First, the bank called to inform me that someone had attempted to access my accounts using forged identification. The attempt had been made from Miami, Florida. Second, Michael called in a panic. "Mom, I can't find Brooke. She's not answering her phone. Her credit cards have been canceled. And there's a notice on our apartment door saying we're being evicted for non-payment of rent." "Michael, where are you right now?" "I'm at the apartment, trying to figure out what happened. There are boxes missing, and some of her clothes are gone, but not all of them. It looks like she left in a hurry." "Michael, I need you to come to my house immediately. There are some things you need to know about what's been happening." When Michael arrived an hour later, I showed him everything: the financial fraud documentation, Lauren's investigation findings, the children's interview reports, and my 2 weeks of behavioral observations. "Mom, are you saying Brooke has been stealing from you and emotionally abusing the children?" "I'm saying the evidence suggests systematic financial exploitation and psychological manipulation that's been ongoing for years." Michael sat at my kitchen table and put his head in his hands. I kept telling myself that things would get better, that she was just stressed about money and would relax when our situation improved. But it never got better. It just got more complicated. "Michael, were you afraid of her?" He looked up with surprise. "Afraid? No, Yes. I was afraid of making her angry, afraid of disagreeing with her, afraid of not meeting her expectations. But I told myself that was normal relationship stuff." "Did she isolate you from other people?" "She said most of my friends were bad influences and my coworkers were competitive and jealous. She said she was protecting me from people who didn't really care about me." "Did she control your access to money and information?" "She managed all our finances because she said I was too trusting and would make bad decisions. She said it was more efficient if one person handled everything." "Michael, you were in an abusive relationship, and the children were being raised in an abusive environment." Over the next hour, Michael began to acknowledge patterns he'd been denying or justifying for years. The constant criticism disguised as helpful suggestions. The isolation from family and friends disguised as protective concern. The financial control disguised as efficient management. But where is she now? And what was she planning in Miami? Lauren arrived that evening with more answers. Her investigation had revealed that Brooke had been planning what she called strategic relocation for at least 6 months. She'd consulted with a law firm about establishing residency in Florida, claiming that she needed to relocate for work opportunities and wanted to ensure she could maintain custody of the children. She'd also inquired about procedures for changing children's school records and obtaining new identification documents. She was planning to kidnap them? She was planning to relocate with them in a way that would make it very difficult for you or Michael to maintain contact or legal recourse. Florida has different custody laws that can be more favorable to primary caretakers, especially if the other parent is claimed to be unfit or unavailable. And the money she stole from me was funding this plan? The legal consultation fees, the temporary housing deposit, the children's documentation preparation, It all fits the pattern of someone preparing to relocate quickly with children who might not legally be hers to relocate. Michael was quiet for a long time. Finally, he asked, "What happens now?" Lauren explained the next steps. Michael would need to file for emergency custody of his children and divorce proceedings against Brooke. I would continue providing care for the children under court supervision while they received counseling and evaluation. Brooke would be located and served with legal papers regarding both the custody issues and the financial crimes. The goal, Lauren explained, is to provide stability for the children while the adults sort out the legal and financial complications. What if Brooke comes back and demands the children? She no longer has legal standing to make demands. The emergency custody order supersedes her parental rights until the court determines what's in the children's best interest. Tuesday morning, I sat with Emma, Jake, and Sophie at my kitchen table and tried to explain their new situation in terms they could understand. "Your daddy and I are going to take care of you while some other adults help figure out the best way to make sure you're safe and happy." Emma asked the question I'd been dreading. "Where's Mama?" "Your mama is in another state, and we're not sure when she'll be back." "Is she coming back?" "We don't know, sweetheart." Sophie started crying, not with understanding of the situation, but with confusion about why her routine had changed so dramatically. Jake asked, "Are we going to live with you forever?" "I don't know what will happen in the future, Jake. But I know that right now, you're safe and loved, and that's what matters most." Over the next 3 weeks, I watched my grandchildren begin to heal from psychological trauma that they were too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel deeply. Emma gradually stopped taking responsibility for her siblings' emotional needs and started expressing her own feelings about confusion, anger, and relief. Jake began asking for help with age-appropriate tasks without apologizing for needing support. Sophie started laughing loudly and messily without checking to see if adults approved of her expressions. They also began asking hard questions about family, love, and why adults sometimes hurt children even when they claim to love them. I answered every question honestly but age-appropriately, always emphasizing that they deserved safety and kindness, that their feelings were valid, and that the adults in their lives now were committed to protecting rather than controlling them. Michael began spending more time at my house, not just visiting the children, but learning how to interact with them without the constant anxiety he'd developed during his relationship with Brooke. I forgot what it felt like to just enjoy being with them. He told me one evening, after we'd spent an afternoon teaching the children to plant vegetables in my backyard garden, "You were so worried about whether you were parenting correctly that you stopped experiencing the joy of being their father. How do I make sure I don't make the same mistakes again?" By remembering that children need love more than they need perfection, and by trusting your instincts instead of letting someone else define what your family should look like. 4 weeks after Brooke's disappearance, Lauren called with news. "We've located Brooke. She's in Miami, and she's been arrested on charges related to identity theft and fraud. The local authorities are also investigating her for child abandonment." What does this mean for the custody situation? It means Michael can petition for full custody without opposition, and you can be designated as the children's legal guardian if that's what the family wants. Is she coming back? She'll be extradited back here for trial on the financial crimes, but her parental rights will likely be terminated as part of a plea agreement. She's more interested in avoiding prison time than in fighting for custody. That evening, I sat with Michael and the children in my living room and told them that their mother would not be coming back to live with them, but that she was safe and being taken care of by other adults. Emma's response surprised me. "Does that mean we don't have to worry anymore about making her mad?" "You don't have to worry about making anyone mad for being yourselves," Jake asked, Can we still live here with you, Grandma Helen? Would you like to live here? All three children nodded enthusiastically. Sophie crawled into my lap. I like how it's not scary here. What made it scary before? I never knew if I was going to be in trouble for something I didn't know was wrong. You're not going to be in trouble here for things you don't know are wrong. If you make a mistake, we'll help you learn how to do better next time. Michael spoke quietly. Mom, I want to make this official. I want you to be their legal guardian, and I want to live nearby so I can be part of their daily lives without the pressure of trying to create a perfect household. Michael, are you sure? Being a guardian for three children at my age is a big responsibility. You've already been doing it for a month, and they're happier and healthier than they've been in years. Besides, it won't be just you. It'll be all of us working together. 6 months later, the legal proceedings were complete. Brooke had pled guilty to financial fraud and child endangerment in exchange for a reduced sentence and the termination of her parental rights. Michael had been awarded full custody, with me designated as legal guardian and primary caregiver. But more importantly, Emma, Jake, and Sophie had transformed from anxious, controlled children into confident, expressive individuals who understood that they were loved unconditionally. Emma discovered she loved writing stories and wanted to be a teacher like me. Jake developed a passion for building things and spent hours creating elaborate constructions with blocks and art supplies. Sophie became the family comedian, making up songs and jokes that kept us all laughing. Michael moved into an apartment 3 blocks away and joined us for dinner 4 nights a week, for breakfast every Saturday morning, and for what Sophie called adventure days every Sunday. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in my own sense of purpose. Instead of spending retirement feeling dismissed and irrelevant, I'd created a household that functioned as a community center for children and families who needed support. I started what I called Helen's Art House, afternoon programs where neighborhood children could come for help with homework, creative activities, and what I privately thought of as emotional education, learning to express feelings, solve problems, and build healthy relationships. The program grew from 3 children, my grandchildren, to 15 children from our neighborhood, many of whom came from households where adults were too stressed or too busy to provide the kind of patient, individual attention that children need to thrive. On Mother's Day, 8 months after Brooke's phone call that had started this entire journey, Emma gave me a card she'd made herself. On the front, she'd drawn a picture of our house with all of us standing in the garden. On the inside, she'd written, "Dear Mama Helen, thank you for teaching us that families take care of each other and love doesn't have to be earned. Love, Emma, Jake, Sophie, and Daddy." That evening, as I sat on my back porch watching Michael push Sophie on the swing he'd installed while Jake and Emma played with neighborhood children in the garden we'd expanded together, I realized something profound had happened. I'd lost a daughter-in-law who saw me as an obstacle, but I'd gained a family who saw me as essential. I'd lost my quiet retirement plans, but I'd gained a purpose more meaningful than anything I could have imagined. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift we can give children is refusing to accept their mistreatment as normal, even when challenging that mistreatment requires us to risk everything we thought we wanted to protect. Brooke had been right about one thing. I hadn't been doing nothing before she made that phone call. I'd been waiting for permission to love my grandchildren fully, waiting for someone else to fix the problems I could see clearly, waiting for a safe opportunity to challenge behavior I knew was harmful. But her demand that I watch her children while she pursued her selfish agenda had given me something she never intended: the opportunity to demonstrate that I was far from powerless, and that protecting children sometimes requires adults to stop being polite and start being brave. As I listened to the sounds of children playing safely in my backyard, I smiled at the irony. Brooke had wanted me to babysit for 2 weeks so she could escape her responsibilities. Instead, I'd gained 3 children permanently, and she'd lost everything she'd tried to steal. The best part was that I'd gained it all through love, patience, and refusing to accept that family relationships had to involve manipulation or control. I'd simply provided what children actually need: safety, consistency, and adults who see them as inherently valuable rather than as projects to be perfected. And now, every morning when I wake up to the sounds of Emma reading to Sophie, Jake practicing piano, and Michael making coffee in my kitchen, I remember that the most powerful thing any adult can do is create a space where children can be themselves without fear. That's not doing nothing. That's doing everything that matters. Sometimes life surprises us by turning our greatest challenges into our most meaningful blessings. And that was today's story of how one phone call changed everything for the better. If you enjoyed it, subscribe here. There are many more stories like this to come.